In conversation with Mari Edwards from Refuge, hear more about how our recent funding is changing the lives of victims and survivors of domestic abuse.
So just moving on to sort of talking specifically about sight loss and domestic violence, that's, in my opinion, something that's quite overlooked. People don't realise that there's an added issue of people who are visually impaired experiencing domestic abuse and how accessible everything is. You're talking about the pandemic and how you had to adapt. How have you had to adapt services for VI people?
I mean, I think that's a really really important question. And as an organisation, a strategic focus actually for Refuge is increasing pathways to support for survivors who face additional barriers, and that includes survivors who are visually impaired. We absolutely recognise that pathways to support for blind and visually impaired survivors are limited, and this is of course corroborated by the Unseen report, which found that there was a lack of accessibility, which is a major barrier to survivors seeking help. So the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, which is run by Refuge, offers some accessible options for survivors to reach out for initial support. But signposting to ongoing services can be challenging. And I think, like you say, many services might be reluctant or unable to accept visually impaired survivors as well. And we really, that the Unseen reports really highlighted this. And as an organisation, we want to absolutely make sure that we're upskilling our staff who are on the front line, working in the community hubs, working in our refuges, working on our National Domestic Abuse Helpline, making sure that we're upskilling them in being able to support visually impaired survivors to make sure that they too can access that support. And you're absolutely right. I think that they will be a group who will have been overlooked essentially, and certainly what that report told me was that either they weren't sure what support was available, or even when they accessed support they didn't feel as though that support was for them or was appropriate for them. So Refuge are incredibly pleased that we are able to begin this project and to make sure that we are upskilling our staff and ensuring that our services are as inclusive and as accessible as possible.
So would you say you're kind of at the start of your journey in a way of making sure that everything is more accessible for VI people? And could you tell us a bit more about the project that we're funding, please?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's really important for me to say that we want visually impaired people to know that there is help available, that we are upskilling our staff to offer the best possible supports to visually impaired survivors of domestic violence, and that we're going to be doing this in 3 ways. The first of those is training, the second is creating ongoing resources, and the third is by having reciprocal training with our partner organisation called Blind Aid. And I can go into a little bit more detail about those 3 different aspects, if that's okay, Olivia?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, okay. So for the first element of this project, which is really about upskilling our staff, we are going to be creating e-learning training modules for our staff on how best to support visually impaired survivors. And we've partnered with specialist sight loss organisation Blind Aid to create this training as well. We also have a part-time project officer that's going to oversee the creation and the delivery of this project. And we thought when we created this that it was incredibly important that we had really dedicated resource to this project, to ensure that we were going to be able to really utilise the information and the material that we have, and to really make sure that we're getting the best possible outcomes. So the project officer works really closely with Blind Aid to consult and to create the materials for the training. And additionally, we want to make sure that male survivors of domestic abuse are also supported. And so we've partnered with an organisation called Respect, who support male victims of domestic abuse and run the National Helpline for Men as additional beneficiaries of the training that's being created as well. Because we also know from the reports that perhaps men didn't always think that Refuge as an organisation were an organisation that they wanted to turn to. So to make sure that we're kind of having the most sustained and longest term impact, the training is being integrated into our e-learning platform, which is called Skillsgate, which means really that staff can access this training on an ongoing basis. This isn't a one-off training that happens on a Tuesday in July, and that if you don't go on it, then you're not going to access it again. It's, we want to make sure that if you're working shifts on our helpline, that you're able to access this. If you're working in our community-based services or refuges, that you're going to be able to access the training. And we envision that the training is going to be broken down into several modules, each focusing on a different area of support as well for visually impaired survivors. And as a minimum, we're going to be providing training on how to advocate for visually impaired survivors, because a huge aspect of the work that our frontline staff do is advocating for survivors, advocating on behalf of survivors with other organisations as well, as you can imagine. So that might be with the police, that might be with health staff, and certainly for visually impaired survivors, I can anticipate that would be with social care staff as well. So that might be adult social care and children's social care as well. So we really want to upskill our staff in being able to provide that really powerful and effective advocacy with those other agencies.
Mhm.
The training is also going to provide practical advice for how to best support visually impaired survivors, and also awareness raising of the barriers experienced by visually impaired survivors in accessing those services. And that's going to come from the lived experience of survivors through Blind Aid. And of course, the unseen reports is a really good basis for understanding some of those barriers as well. So that's really what the training is going to look like, and that's going to be available, made available for all staff in Refuge. The second part of the project is that we're going to be creating ongoing resources, and really the purpose of these resources is to really underpin the e-learning training module, and again working alongside Blind Aid with the same consultancy approach. We're going to be creating a pack of resources which is specifically for our accommodation-based frontline staff. So as I mentioned earlier, our accommodation-based services are our refuges. We have 44 refuges in England, and so in each refuge there will be this resource park, which again, as I mentioned, will build upon the training proposed. Again, providing practical advice and guidance on how best to support a visually impaired survivor in accommodation-based services. So that might be around getting the right kind of software in place. That might be around providing the provision of tablets. It could be small things that makes a huge difference to somebody that's already entering an unfamiliar environment, and
In
with
conversation
unfamiliar
with Mari
people.
Edwards
And
from
so really it's about
Refuge
upskilling those
continued.
staff in order to enable them to best support visually impaired survivors that are going to be living in that setting, and to make that setting as inclusive and as welcoming as we can be.
And you mentioned there was 3 sort of parts of this project.
Yes, yeah, and the third aspect is around reciprocal training and resources. And the reciprocal training is us working again with Blind Aid, and us offering training on domestic abuse to upskill their staff as well. So you can see kind of the reciprocal aspect there. They're going to be providing us real expertise and lived experience for visually impaired people living in their own homes, and what we want to do is to provide that specialist training on domestic abuse, and that training really focuses on raising awareness of domestic abuse to Blind Aid's frontline staff, and to also better support their service users as well.
Mm-hmm.
And also, as part of Blind Aid's work to improve the quality of life and to promote independence for blind and visually impaired people, Blind Aid work really closely alongside their service users. They often visit them in their home. And they, in 2022, I know that they've supported 1,300 individuals with that individualised practical and emotional support. So, that's obviously a huge amount of service users that they're working alongside in this really kind of interpersonal setting, which means that we think that Blind Aid is going to really benefit from being able to have this specialist training from Refuge as well, so that they might be able to recognise some of the signs, other people that they're seeing in their own home. Has there been any differences in their behaviour? Do their partner always insist on staying in their room? And just really helping to spot those signs as well, and also how to ask the question about domestic abuse in a way that would encourage somebody to feel like they can disclose, because we want people to know that there's help available. We want people to disclose when they feel safe to do so, because we know that nobody should be living like this. Nobody should be feeling scared of their partner. Nobody should be being controlled. And everybody's got the right to live a free life that's a safe life as well.
I 100% agree. Yeah. And I really like the idea of this training being online, because a lot of training still, you have to be in person doing it. I think it's, you're reaching more people that way, and having it sort of almost like on demand. So it's not, once only thing, like you were saying, where you do it one time and then you kind of move on. You can constantly come back to it and use it as a really good resource.
Absolutely, and that's why the resource packs are important as well. Again, we see this as a real kind of journey in being able to be the best that we can be in this space and in supporting visually impaired survivors. And so we want people to go on the training. We want them to really be empowered and to feel upskilled and to feel really confident that they're going to be able to not only support visually impaired survivors, but also to advocate on their behalf and to make sure that they're getting the best service possible, not just from Refuge, but from other statutory and voluntary agencies as well, which is why those resource packs are really important. So you're getting the training, and then you're also getting that kind of practical, tangible resource pack as well to support you.
Yeah, I think those three areas are so key, and I think they're going to be really impactful and helpful. I was wondering, when you were planning on sort of rolling that out, when do you envision that will be, coming into fruition?
So we are so I would have to check on the exact dates, but my understanding is that we are beginning to roll this out over the next few months. So I think from kind of July onwards. But recognizing as well that sometimes the summer months aren't necessarily the absolute best time with people, July and August. But that's my understanding. If there are any delays to that, Olivia, I will let you know.
Okay.
I want to make sure that obviously the information is accurate, but that is still my understanding.
Okay. That's quite soon, actually. But I know what you're saying with summer holidays and things like that. It's not the best time, I guess.
Yeah.
But great, thank you. In terms of sort of VI people experiencing the your services, how do you envision they would feel after going through that journey of going to the front, like going through frontline services and coming out the other side? How do you think they would go from feeling trapped, I guess, and not having any help, to after they've sort of finished using Refuge?
So at Refuge, we validate, we believe what's happened, we listen without judgment. And those three things, they sound so simple, but they're so impactful, and they're so very, very important for all survivors of domestic abuse and other violence against women and girls as well. And even just those kind of three simple things can make the world of difference to somebody who have been told for months, sometimes years, and sometimes decades that, you know, their feelings are not valid. Nobody's going to believe you, and that you're going to be judged for whatever you tell people. In addition to that kind of emotional support, what visually impaired survivors will also get is practical support, and that could be around devising maybe safety plans if they want to leave the home that they are in. It might be around supporting them with housing, advocating on their behalf or with them with a range of other organisations. And obviously this project is really supporting us to upskill our staff on the front line. So really ensuring that our staff have that empathy and that understanding of those additional barriers, I think will make a huge difference to visually impaired survivors. I would like to think, and I think that visually impaired survivors will feel as though they have been heard and that they are not being overlooked anymore after they've been through our services, be that the helpline, refuges, or community-based services, that they are not overlooked, that they, you know, can thrive, that they can survive and that they can thrive, and that they can start to recover from the trauma that they have experienced, and they can. That's a lot for anybody to try to do by themselves, and we would always encourage people, when it's safe to do so, to reach out for support. And often a really good way to do that is to reach out through specialist domestic abuse services and the National Domestic Abuse Helpline.
I like what you said about surviving, not just surviving, but thriving. Because you want them to live a full life, and they deserve to. And, you know, it is one step at a time, because, you know, that can seem impossible, I guess, when you're right in the thick of this abuse and this trauma. You might not be able to see you coming out on the other side, but I think your organisation really gives people hope. And, you know, empathy, validation, you know, no judgment. It sounds, like you said, you know, very standard, but it's very hard to have. And I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about VI people, about people suffering from domestic violence, full stop. So it's really good to hear that, you know, people are, you know, you guys take the time to actually listen to people and take them through that journey. And, you know, it's not just emotional support, it's practical, helping them with housing, and it's very layered. And yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
we have got the most amazing frontline staff who are skilled, who are experienced, who are whose knowledge is just amazing. And you were saying that, you know, that there's hope in that. I will say as well that survivors of domestic abuse that I've worked with over the years are the strongest, most inspirational people that you could ever come across. And they will have been told that they are none of those things for a number of years, perhaps even their own lives. And what we can sometimes do is just to help them to see what they've got inside them, you know, that strength to survive every day when somebody else is controlling you and is hurting you, even if that's hurting you kind of psychologically or emotionally. The ability to survive that means that you're an incredibly strong person, and actually just a massive inspiration to us at Refuge every single day. You know, nobody at Refuge needs inspiration to get up, you know, to do their job. We're inspired constantly by the people that we are supporting and by what they are able to achieve. And we see, you know, sometimes a journey to recovery isn't necessarily a linear one. There are, of course, ups and downs, and which is really normal. And it's really normal for people to, you know, have difficult days and difficult weeks, but just know that you're on the right path, know that you are moving forward, even if it's not moving at quite the pace that you want it to. But we are constantly inspired by the survivors that come through all of our services. They're amazing, they are strong, and you know, they've been through the most difficult things imaginable, and so they've got that resilience and that strength in them already. It's just that we can sometimes help them to recognize and to see that.
Amazing. Yeah. Very inspiring. I agree. I think if I was in that situation working with people, I would feel very, you know, inspired and just in awe of how these people are able to continue and, you know, reach out for help. It's very difficult. And, you know, that's another thing, like actually getting to that stage to ask for help is a massive achievement. So can I just say thank you again for
Thank you.
Joining me and discussing this and explaining everything so perfectly. Just to, you know, say on the last note, what is it that you really enjoy about the organisation, sorry, that you work for? What's you know, why have you stayed for all these years? What are you most proud of?
I think Refuge is an absolutely amazing organisation, and what makes Refuge the amazing organisation it is the people that works there. People turn up day after day after day, really just wanting to help women and their children who are survivors of domestic abuse. There is something incredibly special and empowering about working in that kind of environment, where whether or not you're working for the finance team or working for our people and culture team, working in our comms team or working in the front line, you're making a real difference to the lives of women and children. And that's an incredibly fulfilling role to have, to know that you're making that difference. And I don't think it exists everywhere, and to get up and to know that you're making that difference is incredibly inspiring. And also, as I was mentioning before, the service users that we work with, their stories are often heartbreaking, but their ability to survive that and to move forward is not heartbreaking. That's absolutely inspiring, and that's what inspires all of us at Refuge, kind of day in and day out.
Thank you very much. Thank you.